Hello, Kansas and Western fans. We're here today with another How I Do Stuff video. What we're going to do today is lay some track here for the Advent Mills spur in the Wichita Industrial Park. And it's going to come off of this yard here and parallel the main line where you can see that line that's drawn. And then I'm going to stub end it over there. I'm just going to show you how I do a single piece of track because there's no point in showing the whole thing. It's all the same once I get started. But what you need, or at least what I use anyway. Here's the collection of tools and equipment that I need. You got your rail joiners, and I use all micro-engineering flex track, and so I have micro-engineering joiners here. Code 70, the right size for the track that I'm using code 70 flex. So I have those on hand. I've got a screwdriver here to help to adjust the placement of rail joiners, a file to file down the ends of the rails, two different rail nippers. I have a dedicated one for plastic and a dedicated one for metal. And that one's a Xuron rail nipper specifically for that purpose. Marker to mark where the track's going to go. A ruler to make sure I'm maintaining my spacing between track center lines. And then I've got some Alex Plus clear caulk for gluing it down with a putty knife for spreading it out nice and thin. And then I just have some cans of soda here for using weights just to keep the track in place while the caulk dries. So that's the equipment. So what I've got here is I've already drawn, this is a center line that I used when I laid the rest of this track. I had several of them drawn with a big 4-foot yardstick, more or less. So that's left over from that. So I already know I have the right spacing to start off of the end of this turnout. And then what I did was I used a ruler, and I just have that steel ruler to basically make markings every so often. You can see the little dash marks there to maintain that spacing. So once I get the track laid and in place, I'll be able to see those marks, and that's for the center line of the track, which I believe is either 2 inches or 2 1/4. I can't remember what I used, but pretty standard for the layout. And then once I get the glue down, which I keep it nice and thin so I can see that, I'll be able to see that center line. So first of all, put the camera down here for a second. I've already got a piece of flex track, and I try to use whole pieces whenever possible, but I already have this one bent to fit just to save a little time here. And you can kind of see here how it's laid out. The nice thing about micro-engineering, at least in my opinion, is when you bend it into shape, it stays that way. Now, it can make it also difficult to deal with, and I know that's why some people don't like it, but I do like it for that reason, because once I get it bent that way, I can do everything else I need to do, and it won't change. So once I get it bent to shape, the next step is to see if I can get this adjusted here. Next thing is to make sure that this initial end matches up with what I have. And to do that, first I have to trim off this end tie here, because you can see how the rail joiners on the turnout are running up against that. So that's why you see gaps in people's track that they've laid, is they have to nip that end tie to make sure they can make a connection. So I'm going to do that real quick and be right back with you. All right, so you can see I've got that track, or that tie removed. So now I just have to make sure that the ends of the rails meet, and you can see that there's a gap. So what I need to do is I need to trim off that far rail so that it fits right. See if I can get that better zoomed in here. So I just have to trim off the end of this one here to make sure that fits like that. So I'm going to trim that off really quick and be right back with you. Oh, I forgot. That's another thing I use the Sharpie for, is I'll put the track end where I want it to fit, and then I'll just mark on the other one where I want it to cut, so that way I don't lose my spot. And at this part here, I'm just kind of eyeballing where the end point is and hitting the top of the rail with that Sharpie, just so we can try to make it as flush as possible. And when you're doing this, you have to make sure that your track is laying properly. So you always want to double check when you're getting ready to cut rail, measure twice, cut once, that it's still laying approximately the way you want it to, so you don't cut it wrong and then end up having to fix it. So I'm going to cut that real quick and be right back with you. Okay, so I've trimmed off the end of the rail and shaved off, filed off the burrs. I also did the other end of the rails because they were a little bit uneven, and just to make that end piece of track easier to install, I went ahead and evened those two up as well. So back here, let's see what kind of a cutting job I did. And I'd say that's pretty good. So the next step now would be to get the rail joiners, and I don't have a really good word for this, I'm going to use the word primed. You want to make sure that you can make a good connection before you put glue down, because there's a possibility that maybe you haven't filed the ends very well, or maybe the end of the rail joiner is pinched that's already on there. So what I'll do is a test fit before I put glue down and make a big mess of things. So I'm going to try to do that now and see if it's a pain or not. And you can see how it's just kind of pushing that one rail joiner in. So that's what I'll use the screwdriver for. And if this works, then I'm good. If not, I'll show you what else I do. Okay, I am able to slide that with that flathead screwdriver. So that's all I'm trying to do, is to make sure it's going to fit. And if it's too difficult, it'll mess with your track alignment. So now that that's on, I'll check to make sure my track is still laid like I want it, and it is still pretty close to that. So then what I'll do is I'll make sure that I'm on my center line all the way down. And I'm pretty close, but I'm going to make a couple adjustments real quick and see if I can't make it closer. See if I can find a place to put this. And again, I'm doing this with it connected to the next track so that I can make sure it's going to be as accurate as possible. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So the next step is to use the Sharpie to draw a line on both sides, one side, whatever, and that'll show me give me a guide actually of where I'm going to glue. So I'm going to do that really quick. And I'll do one at the end tie too, so I don't put too much glue beyond where I need it. And if you get a little Sharpie on your ties, not a big deal. You're going to end up painting them anyway, probably. I will anyway. All right, now the next step is to normally you could just go ahead and glue from here, but what I'm going to do, since this is a spur track, an industrial track that hasn't been maintained in a long time, I'm going to go in and remove a few ties and just make them look disorderly in general. So I'll show you how I do that once I pull that track off. Hang on just a second. All right, so I've got my track upside down on a flat area to work with nothing in the way, and this is the easiest way that I've found to do this. So basically what I'm going to do is just kind of randomly cut the webbing, which is just that little, I don't know if it's the webbing, but it's just a piece of plastic that maintains the ties at a certain distance from each other. So I'm not going to do every one. This is not the worst track in the world, but I'll just go through here and nip every so often. And if I'm going to remove a tie, I'll make sure I nip either side and just flip the tie off so I don't forget which one I'm trying to do. And I don't generally do a whole lot of heavy weathering on my track in terms of make it look super nasty, just because I want to make sure it's going to work properly. We'll go through and do a good chunk of these. But there's no reason for you to have to watch all this. So I'll go through and do the end all the way to the end of the track, and then go back and cut the other end of these, which makes these nice little things that pop all over the place. See if you can find one here. So basically what I'm doing here is creating gaps. Now, when you create big gaps like that, you still want to have a tie to some degree. I wouldn't say even the worst track in the world has huge gaps like that. So you want to make sure you separate the spacing on either side so you can slide those ties to help fill in the gap to some degree. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this, and then I'll be right back with you. All right, I've got my ties all snipped the way I want so that we've got some a little bit of old track work represented more or less. So now it's time for the glue. Now you don't want to put this on real thick because then it becomes a giant mess to clean off later. And I've got some extra there I'm going to have to clean off. And I cut the tip on this way too wide. You don't want to cut the tip this wide just because it becomes a mess to clean up. And this is getting towards the end of the tube, so it's a little bit nastier than normal. But that can be cleaned up. Now I'm just spreading it out with my putty knife here, trying not to leave too much junk. And that's why I have a paper towel handy to wipe off excess. And you can see I'm not leaving a whole lot left on there. And it doesn't need a whole lot. Now this stuff grabs and holds pretty well. And obviously it's up to you whether or not you want to glue your track down. I know it's not required. I just like to make sure everything is nice and stable because it's going to be a while before I probably get to ballasting this section. And I don't want to screw up the track by every time I clean it or whatever, making an adjustment that messes something up. So I just prefer to glue mine. Okay, with that out of the way, now it's time to put the track in place. So now here's the reason why I like using caulk instead of, I don't know, maybe other types of glues do this too, and obviously caulk isn't really a glue. I learned this from somebody else on the internet, and I've just preferred to do it this way. But it holds the track in place, but you can still move it, at least for a little while. You don't want to take forever because then the caulk will start to dry and then it'll be completely useless. But now what I'll do is I'll just go down the center line and we'll see if you can see what I'm trying to do here. First of all, make sure that your connection is good by just running your fingers over it. And if you don't feel anything catch, then you know you have a nice smooth connection. And then I'm just trying to make sure that the track fits right along my mark that I made with the Sharpie, since I already checked to make sure that was where I wanted it. And then you just to keep making slight adjustments as needed. So just looking down that, it looks nice and smooth to me at least. And then looking at the tie spacing, you can see it's not exactly perfect, which is what I was going for. Some are kind of off kilter, some like those two are too close together. So a little bit old track. Anyway, once I've double checked to make sure that everything is laying the way I want. Double check my connection to make sure that's nice and smooth. It is. Then I'll put my cans on to hold it in place. This may not be totally necessary either. It's just another make sure everything stays in place. It doesn't get bumped by other activity, whatever. And I just use enough cans to basically fill up that piece of track. And that's how that looks. So that's a complete piece of flex from beginning to end. That's how I do it. If you guys want to share tips for others that might be watching this video, I'm all for that. This is not the only way to lay track. This is just the way that I do it. So if you have any other questions to follow up, I can certainly answer those. Otherwise, that's how I do that. Thanks for watching.